think you go to a top tier MBA, you're going to have a lot of opportunities at your fingertips, and you really do have to kind of carve out your own path. You're not going to have 15 companies lined up saying, can you work for us? You really have to go out there and do some cold outreach, especially if you're trying to work for a smaller company. Jason Lee, I'm Senior Vice President, Chief Strategy Officer for the Minnesota Twins Baseball Club. I graduated from Harvard Business School in 2016 in Section H with you.
All right, Jason. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you making the time. I know you're so busy, and thank you for giving me your time, but also anyone who ends up watching this, appreciate you giving them your time. So what exactly is this? So this is going to be part of a video project that is tailored for people that are early in their careers, trying to figure out what career path they might want to take, and considering an MBA as part of that plan. And so once in a while, I have the opportunity to speak with people who are in these shoes, considering an MBA. And my parting advice for them is always, we just talked about my experience, but you should go out and talk to many people, to learn about their experiences, to get a fuller picture from the different programs even that you might be interested in applying to. But what I realized is that most people don't know that many alumni, especially from the different schools and different MBA programs that they might want to apply to. And so I'm kind of leaving them, I'm kind of just like leaving them out there, wiping my hands clean. And so this is what brings us here today. I want to talk to people that are 5, 10, 20 years, after their MBA program from different programs, and ask them all the questions that I wish I would have asked when I was doing all the coffee chats with as many people as I could when I was applying to business school. So thank you for doing this. Are you ready to jump into it?
Yeah, let's do it. First off, thanks for doing this. I'm pumped to be here. I really appreciate it, Mike.
Yeah, let's do this. Thank you for being here. Could you kick things off with just a brief intro, like who you are, what you're doing today, and also where you got your MBA and what year that was?
Yeah, for sure. Jason Lee, I'm Senior Vice President, Chief Strategy Officer for the Minnesota Twins Baseball Club. In my role, I oversee really a lot of the things on the business side of the Twins organization. So thinking about our revenue, our ticket sales, our fan engagement, innovation on the business side, really all geared toward how do we drive growth for a baseball organization that plays 81 home games, hopefully some playoff games, but ideally over the long term, a lot more than just that. So a lot of my time is spent thinking about our core business, but also some expansion opportunities for us to spread our wings and become a bigger organization. I graduated from Harvard Business School in 2016 in Section H with you.
Section mates. Yep, that's right. Same here. So we're about like 7 years, I think, out of business school.
That's right.
But about like 10-ish years from like the application process, right? So if you'll join me in kind of reflecting back 10, even like 11 or 12 years, I'm curious I want to be reminded, I don't remember exactly, what did you do before business school? This was before we met. But yeah, what was your career looking like back then?
Yeah, so I went through the process in late 2013, I want to say. So it's been 10 years now. At the time, I was at Google out in New York. I was working in analytics on their ad sales team. Before that, I had been working in consulting out of undergrad. So I was a management consultant for about 3 years, focused on technology, and media. So I've been at Google for about 2 years. Loved my job. I was very happy with it. But I also didn't have much of a vision for the future. Didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in, say, 5 years' time, even 3 years' time. I just had a lot of questions in terms of what my path might be. And so as I thought about my next steps, I really wanted just a period to do some self-exploration, to kind of consider, what are the outer limits of what might be possible. And so that led me down the path of thinking about an MBA and having that be a vehicle for me to really do some self-discovery, to understand the range of options that might be in front of me for my career. And also, frankly, just to meet a ton of people, get a lot of exposure. And hopefully, if I were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to get into one of my top schools, qualify myself to a wider pool of potential career options.
Totally. A lot of that is exactly the same as kind of the reasons why I started to explore an MBA. What was that when you were looking around at MBAs? What did that look like for you? I know personally, because we know each other well, that you're very thoughtful, very process oriented, very good at research, among many other things. But yeah, I want to know what Jason of, take us back to 2012, 2013. What was your process like when you were researching MBA programs and just figuring out if an MBA was even a good fit for what you were trying to accomplish?
It was actually a pretty simple process. I wanted to go to one of the top schools. And so I had a list of probably 5 to 7 schools that I was targeting. And I thought a little bit about, what am I trying to get out of this? There are some schools that specialize in, as an example, finance or entrepreneurship or general management. And so I had a general sense that I wanted to go more toward, the management route and maybe the entrepreneurship route. But it was pretty simple for me, just, what's the best school I could get into. So I probably narrowed it down to about 5 or 6 schools that I thought were my targets, with the hope I could get into at least one of them. So I went through that process and did a lot of research about each school, had the chance to visit a few of them on the East Coast where I was at the time. I spent quite a bit of time really thinking about my story, about, what I wanted to share with the admissions committee. So it's been 10 years now. I can't recall exactly, but I want to say I spent a good couple of months just trying to think through my essays and how I would paint that picture for them.
Yeah, I think that process, I think you mentioned spending about 2 months kind of working on your story alone, right? Which is really the bulk of the application, right? I guess you can spend a lot of time preparing for the standardized tests and that sort of thing, but the crafting of the story, I think, is where you spend a lot of like the hard thinking time, like the good thinking time. At least I did too. Yeah. And for me, I was like 24 years old at the time. So I had never really asked myself like the questions of like, what is my purpose? What is my why? What are my long-term goals? I knew what I wanted to do like next week, but further than that, I wasn't really sure. So yeah, what did you ultimately write about in your essays? What do you recall from those short-term, long-term goals
Yeah,
that you wrote about?
you and I were in a very similar boat. I was always given the advice, even if you're not quite sure what you want to do, you got to make it sound like you know exactly what you want to do. So I did take that advice. I talked about my passion for media. Didn't quite talk about sports where I ended up, but talked a lot about media. I remember in my essays, I was talking about my journey as somebody who worked in a very data heavy field over the past few years. But in undergrad, so I went to Brown University for my undergrad. I was a humanities major. I majored in international relations. I actually took 0 math classes during my time at Brown because we have an open curriculum. And so I talked a lot about how I would use sort of my left brain and my right brain to solve problems and how I thought that could map out to the future with a focus on kind of media and thinking about that space. I'd like to think that it sort of ended up in that same general realm, even though kind of sports wasn't something I'd been considering at the time. But it's kind of funny how it works out. I kind of wrote that in the essays, not feeling super convicted, but knowing that I had to tell a story. But it sort of panned out in that direction, which I think speaks to maybe some underlying, discovery that I did through that process.
Yeah, discovery is a great word to describe the process. It's like personal discovery. It sounds like you were pretty honest in your applications. While you understood the practicality of crafting a story, it sounds like you injected a lot of honesty because ultimately it played out and you were true to like what you were actually interested in and what you cared about. So I want to come back to how it pans out kind of post MBA. But let's stay here. You apply to MBA, you get into HBS. When you think about your business school years, like what stands out to you as one of the more memorable things or a couple memorable things?
Oh man. I mean, the whole experience it was one of the best 2 years of my life. I think about the things that happened in the classroom, outside the classroom. I love my experience, pretty much every single moment of it. And what I'd say is you and I being in the same section, being really close friends, you were in a lot of my favorite memories. But, as I think about the classroom, just that first year, what we call RC, or I think it's required curriculum at HBS. That's just such a foundational thing, just to be able to get exposure to every single discipline: finance, operations, leadership, entrepreneurship. I mean, that's just irreplaceable. So I took so much out of those classes. Even if I can't recall most of the cases that we read, just being in the classroom, learning from our professors. A couple classes that stand out to me are for sure operations. I learned pretty early on that I was pretty good at that. I just had a knack for picking up those concepts. So I just loved that class and what we learned. And then another one is finance. That one was a lot more foreign for me. It wasn't a natural strength of mine, but it taught me how to think like an investor, how to really think about these concepts within business from a finance lens. So that was just invaluable. And so outside the classroom, I would say just the people that you meet. You're in a class with 94 amazing individuals from different backgrounds. And then at HBS, it's that times 10 sections. So almost 1,000 people. Just those moments where you get to spend with people, learn about them, being able to talk to them, hear about what they think about, certain topics or how they think about their careers. That was probably the biggest learning experience for me. And then one more thing I'll add is just the opportunity to do some things that are pretty immersive and experiential. Got to travel to Peru my first year. And then Mike, you and we went to China in our second year and got to do a little bit of a field trip. I got a lot of memories from that trip. Some are kind of work related and project related. Some are not. But it was just an awesome cultural immersive experience that I'll never forget.
Yeah. So that's you're bringing back so many good memories for me too. This is one of the cool things about these conversations is you're like rejiggering my brain a little bit. That China trip was a ton of fun. I remember a lot of good memories from that one, both like on the learning side and just the social side. Traveling is a good way to get to know people on a deeper level. I think just, you spend more time, you go through more things. That's really cool. Jason, you mentioned the classes, you mentioned operations and finance. I think it's pretty well known kind of that HBS has the case method for classes. And there's actually a really great, I think, video I remember watching back in the day of like a case around, I think it was around Pepsi. And it gives you a good like outside in view of what the classroom looks like and what the interactions look like. But how do you what else can you say about like that learning experience, like from your experience? What would you tell someone, right, that hasn't experienced that firsthand? What is it like? What does it feel like? What did you get from that experience?
Yeah, I think the case method, it's an incredible thing. Being able to think about an applied problem and then talk about it as a class. I feel like I learned so much more from that than I would have from a straight lecture or textbook. That being said, I think there are certain classes that are tailor-made for it and certain classes that might be a little bit less so. The other thing I'll say is that I think that for me, being somebody who's not super comfortable talking in front of 94 people, there was what I got out of the readings and from listening to the discussion. And then there was also just this element of needing to pump myself up to participate. And, you kind of get into the swing of things at some point. But the first, I would say, few weeks to even probably a couple months, that was hard to navigate, to figure out, how am I supposed to kind of take this in, but also try to get in there myself. So there definitely is that element to it. But it puts you out of your comfort zone. It definitely requires you to really know the material inside and out and be ready to engage. But I think the discussions and just being able to hear how different people approach your problem, I mean, to me, that was the biggest learning experience of all.
Yeah, same. Like I think you do every class together with the same 93 people, and so over time you get to know. One of the coolest learning experiences is learning how other people's brains work, how they think, how they solve problems, how they reconcile things, and so you get to know like different characters, if you will, in the narrative, and try to figure that out for yourself. Yeah, I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth, but it can be a daunting experience, especially early on when you're just trying to get comfortable with it. I remember that. And it's a true test of, I think, listening skills. you have to really follow a very fast-paced conversation that's literally happening 360 around you, right? People behind you, people in front of you, on the sides, and then figure out, when you do have an opportunity to contribute, how do you do that? So if anyone's been in a meeting before and you're like, you have something you're trying to say, but there's four other people in the meeting, and you're trying to figure out how to be respectful and professional, but also contribute some important information or important opinion. Imagine that, but with 93 people. It's a, it's a heck of an experience.
Yeah, and you can't replace that anywhere else. I mean, you sort of get that in meeting settings, but to have 93 other people that you're trying to engage with and learn from, that's something that is a special thing. And I cherish those memories. I probably wouldn't want to go back there and have to speak in front of 94 people again, but it was it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's cool. So you kind of took us inside the classroom. I think that experience, we're doing our best to explain what it's like for people who might not have experienced it. But is there anything else about HBS that you're like, that was like, you were pleasantly surprised by, just surprised by, that maybe folks that are applying, they might just not be aware of it? It's not something that maybe the school promotes a ton, but is an awesome part of the experience.
Yeah. I think that HBS is known as being a little bit more about general management, but the number of entrepreneurship resources that we had and the focus on students really thinking about ideas, developing them, finding partners who can help them nurture those ideas. I didn't feel like that was de-emphasized at all. If anything, I felt like there was a spotlight shown on that. And you and I, we had the chance to work on a couple of projects together where we were kind of, thinking about ideas and really thinking about how to bring them to life. So for me, I didn't quite expect that coming into the experience, but I thought that was really unique and one of the funnest elements of the whole program.
Yeah, that's a cool perspective. I think, we did work on a couple entrepreneurial projects. I don't even want to call them ventures, but they were hugely impactful to me and kind of like the path I ended up taking. But I wouldn't call it going from 0 to 1, but we went 0 to like 0.5 a couple of things. And it was an awesome learning experience. Yeah, definitely leverage those lessons learned to kind of what I'm doing today. But that's for another day. Want to keep talking about your experience. So that's your MBA experience. Maybe we can transition here a little bit and talk about what you did immediately after HBS. And also, I think what could be helpful to people watching this is like what your recruitment process was like. Because there are like standard recruitment processes and then there's less standard recruitment processes. Could you remind me kind of like what your approach was, maybe our second year, and then what you ultimately did as a kind of your first stop after HBS?
Yeah, for sure. I'll actually back up and talk about our first year. I think one of the things that I didn't realize coming into business school is that you go in there, you think you have all this time to discover and learn and test out new things. You go in August, recruiting for consulting starts in September. There's not a lot of time. And so that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks, like, holy crap, I got to think about recruiting now. And I got to come up with a strategy. I got to tell my story. I got to think about, what clubs to get involved in. And so there really isn't a whole lot of time to really think about that. The approach I took for our first year internships was I did apply to some big tech companies. I did get at least one offer from like a large tech company that was somewhat similar to what I had done in my previous job. And so I ultimately decided to pass up on that. And then I decided I was going to apply to startups instead for my internship. So that was a hard decision. I know a lot of our classmates were kind of grappling with that. Do you take the guaranteed, consulting or kind of, tech or finance offer, or do you try to roll the dice and see what you can get in the second semester? Fast forward to our second year, kind of a similar boat. I was applying to big tech jobs, to startup jobs. Ultimately, I had an offer to go back to Google, where I could essentially do a very similar role, at a slightly higher level. than what I had done before. And I just decided, you know what? I did this MBA for a reason. I didn't necessarily want to just go back doing the same thing I would have done. So I'm gonna decline on this opportunity and think about what else could be. And so I spent the rest of the second semester of our second year applying to jobs. For me, I had a pretty tight geographical focus. I wanted to be in New York. I wanted to be in technology, and I wanted to work for a growth stage company. And so those three things stacked on top of one another didn't lead me to a huge pool of companies. And so that was actually a gift, because it let me be a lot more targeted with how I thought about my conversations and my applications. And ultimately went through a few processes, got a couple of offers, and I decided to go to a company called Paperless Post that does online invitations, online greeting cards, located in New York. And I went into kind of a partnership strategy role over there.
Cool. No, thanks for that background. It's I'm reminded of kind of the path you took. I want to ask you about that second year in business school. I imagine it's like it could be, at least I did a traditional path, right? So I kind of followed the herd, and everyone that was doing consulting, we were all in the same boat. We recruited heavily early on in the first year. A lot of us got internships and secured those jobs. And then second year, we didn't have to really recruit, right? Especially if you're intending to go back like I was. But you had to carve your own path is, what I'm not sure if it's coming out perfectly clear. Like you had to do your own work, even though you were at Harvard Business School. Like you had to figure out what companies you wanted to reach out to and apply to. They weren't necessarily coming to campus and like calling you, right? You had to narrow down your pool. But what did that feel like, aside from like the actual mechanics of, getting interviews and preparing for those interviews? What did it feel like being in your second year, if you remember? And like me, I'm done with recruiting, and I'm like, going out to eat every night, and you're grinding, trying to figure out, if you're going to have a job, come fall.
Yeah, it was sort of nerve-wracking for sure, knowing that a lot of my classmates, a lot of my friends had things lined up, and I was still, trying to find opportunities. At the same time, I kept on reminding myself to trust the process. We had a lot of advisors and counselors at HBS, and a lot of classmates and alums who would always say, "Hey, you're going to be fine. You're going to be totally fine. It's just a matter of when and not if." And that kind of really calmed me down a little bit. I think a lot of other classmates were in the same boat, where they were kind of just saying, "Hey, what if this doesn't go the way I think it's going to go?" But at the end of the day, we were all just fine. We had plenty of opportunities. I will say that it for sure was more outbound than inbound. You think you go to a top tier MBA, you're going to have a lot of opportunities at your fingertips, and you really do have to kind of carve out your own path. You're not going to have 15 companies lined up saying, can you work for us? You really have to go out there and do some cold outreach, especially if you're trying to work for a smaller company. And so I remember, second semester of our second year, I would spend a couple hours a day after classes, looking up alums to reach out to, networking on LinkedIn, writing cover letters, updating my resume to tailor it for certain jobs. So it's a lot of work, but it did pay off in the end.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious about that, because I never had to do this. And what I mean is, when I applied for consulting firms, they're looking for people that are hardworking, that the business schools have kind of vetted already through the application process, that can solve some problems. But your previous experience doesn't really matter too much. Someone coming in like yourself that is interested in working at, growth companies or startups, you have your background. You've done a couple things in your past. How do you position yourself to work at these companies? You have a general business background. It's different if you're like a software engineer that's like very specific. I'm a front end engineer. This is the job post you have. But for you, like, how does that work? How does an MBA essentially position themselves for a business role at a startup?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, what I found is that the function actually really mattered, especially in tech. I thought a lot about product management as a path that I wanted to go down. And I learned pretty early on in the process that if I wanted to be a PM, I kind of had to have PM experience beforehand. So there was a real chicken and egg thing where it's like, I want to do this, but I haven't done it before. It is for sure possible to do a career change and a functional change. It's possible to break into PM during business school, but you got to be super focused. You got to be, you got to be on top of your game, and you have to be willing to take some risks. And so I thought a lot about, what function I want to go into. For me, I ended up saying, I kind of want to go for either a strategy, maybe a partnerships, maybe an operations type role. I actually found that it was harder than I had anticipated to do a wholesale functional or career shift in the middle of my MBA experience. And so I tried to split the difference and go for something that was familiar, but maybe a little bit of a stretch without going too far and putting myself at risk of kind of striking out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's like some sort of framework I think we used to talk about, which was like there's like industry, role, and maybe like geography is the third one.
I think that's right. Yeah,
it's hard to change all three. You want to, you're more likely to land in a good spot if you give on one, and give on two to open up even more opportunities. I could be wrong in that third one, but it's something like that, right? So you kind of want to hang your hat on something that is familiar, and then kind of stretch in one or two other directions. So that was your experience at Paperless or that's your experience kind of like post business school. You worked at Paperless Post. I would like to know how the heck you went from selling birthday e-cards to the major leagues, to Major League Baseball.
I wanted the same thing every day myself. I have no idea how that happened, and it happened so fast. So just for context, I was selling e-cards as late as 2017, and by December 2018, I was working for a Major League Baseball franchise. So kind of thinking about that journey, really, I joined Paperless Post. I thought the company was cool. I had a really, good relationship with my future boss during the interviews. I felt a good rapport with her. I felt the culture was a right fit. If I had to be totally transparent, I'm not super passionate about e-cards or invitations. It's not a space I think a whole lot about, or I think many people think a whole lot about. So for me, it was really more of a company culture kind of growth stage fit, as opposed to saying, this is my life's mission and, the work of my life. It also gave me a chance to think about partnerships, which is a function I'd never done before. So for me, I viewed that as maybe an intermediate step to kind of break into this world, this broader world of growth stage tech on the East Coast. Did that for about a year. And I felt myself, kind of wanting to expand my experience, maybe at a different kind of company. I was starting to question whether partnerships was the right fit for me. I mentioned earlier, like operations and finance. Those are two classes at HBS I gravitated toward. That felt like my strong suit, just kind of thinking about how to unpack problems and kind of solve them in a really nuanced way. Building relationships, cold calling clients and partners and trying to convince them to, integrate with our platform. That was not really my strong suit or my forte. And I started to pick up on, hey, maybe I need to kind of rethink the function that I'm in. The next move that I made, I went to Amazon, and I went to a partnerships role at Amazon. And looking back on it now, I think for me, it was almost going back to a safe space at a big tech company, trying to think about, what could I do to open up more options for myself, knowing that I'm kind of in a function that might not be where I ultimately land. And so I thought, if I could add another big company to my resume, could that open myself up to potentially other opportunities? And so I was doing that job for about, I want to say 10 or 11 months, coming up on a year, when our classmate, Daniel Adler from Section H, in our same year, sent me an email out of the blue, and he just said, "Hey, I'm working for the Minnesota Twins. He right now he's our assistant general manager on the baseball side, so he's very involved in the baseball leadership of our organization. But he had this job for at the time VP of Business Strategy and Analytics that the Twins were looking for, and he knew that I was a big sports fan, a big baseball fan. He knew that I had a background in data and analytics and strategy, and so he sent me the posting. I was in New York at the time. Got the email, and I was like, that's really cool. I'm probably not going to get that job, but it's really cool. And I thought about it for like a day or two. And the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? Like, what the hell? I'll just go for it. I'll put my name in. We'll see what happens. I'm likely not going to get it. So reached back out to him. I talked to my wife, Nicole. She had never been to Minnesota before, but I told her, hey, this is just something I'm going to do. I'm probably not going to get it, but just going to put my hat in the ring. And then one thing led to another. It just so happened the Twins were looking for somebody from the outside, someone with some non-baseball, non-sports experience to enter into that role. So for me, it was lightning a bottle. It was the right organization at the right time, right place. So I got an interview. I passed the interview. I got a second interview in Minnesota. And then, within, I would say probably about a month and a half's time, they said, do you want to come to Minnesota? And do you want to start here at the Twins? So at that point, my wife and I, so Nicole and I, we had to really think about geography, about kind of our future. And we decided, you know what, we're going to go for it. So that's sort of how I ended up in my role right now. It wasn't for sure a pre-planned path. It wasn't something that I carefully constructed. Instead, I would say it was very opportunistic. And I think that speaks to the MBA experience. Had we not been in section with Daniel Adler, I would not be here in Minnesota right now. And so, for me, going to HBS, building those relationships, it changed the trajectory of my life and my career. It's kind of a crazy story.
Yeah, it is. Like many are. I got to rewind a second though. I never got an email from Adler, so I didn't see him. I didn't see him sharing the job. I didn't see him sharing the job in the WhatsApp group for our section. Maybe I'm not in the group anymore. Did I get kicked out? No. So why did
you were too big of
Adler?
a basketball fan than a baseball fan? It sounds like.
Okay, yeah. So why did Adler why did he reach out to you in particular though for this role?
You know what it was? So I was a big Kansas City Royals fan. So my hometown's Kansas City. I was a big Royals fan all throughout business school. And that happened to be like the heyday of the Royals. In 30 years, they missed the playoffs every single year except for those 2 years. So I was very vocal about my support for my hometown team and for my fandom for baseball. And Adler was, obviously he comes from the sports world. So he kind of knew me as a baseball guy. So I think he kind of put two and two together and said, hey, this is a guy that's huge into baseball. He knows kind of data, strategy, analytics. And so I feel like, just some of those small things that you think are, inconsequential decisions or inconsequential things, they end up actually mattering sometimes.
Totally. And so I will say this, like what I know, like everyone is a little weird. You're weird, I'm weird, but you're weird because when we were in business school, you would spend hours most nights watching Royals games from the first inning through the bottom of the ninth.
It's true.
And so like not many people still watch baseball games from beginning to end in every single regular season game in the spring. And so you were doing that. So you were a diehard Royals fan. You're a diehard baseball fan. And that's just one of the things that people kind of knew about you. Some people knew about you, probably not even everyone, right? And so that's a big part of, I think, why probably from at least my perspective, why Adler reached out to you.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so I'm curious because I think a lot of people like are interested in pursuing careers in sports, but like non-athlete careers. What's your thought on anyone interested in pursuing a career in baseball, aside from the NBA experience? But what do you look for? What does the makeup of the business side of a baseball team look like?
Yeah, what's crazy about sports, I would say all pro sports teams and franchises and league offices, even college athletic departments, is these are big brands. I mean, you think about any basketball team or any baseball team, any football team, like huge brands, sometimes even global brands. The companies themselves are really small. We're talking probably a couple hundred people max, who are responsible for, leading, managing, growing these franchises. And so, what that means is that every single person sort of has to do 5 jobs in one. You don't have large matrix organizations where you have 15 functions and 10 roles within each function that all line up. And so I think versatility, being able to get shit done, frankly, is at a premium when you work in a sports franchise or a sports organization. So for sure, there's that kind of go-getter attitude, that eagerness, that hunger, that passion to be in and around the game. I think the versatility to be able to show that you have skill sets in a lot of different areas. If I had to be honest, a lot of times you got to kind of just get in the door and work your way up. I would say my path, where I came in from the outside, after having had a career in a different area, that's not very common. And I wouldn't say that that's the most replicable. It was very opportunistic, but that's kind of how sports is. It's very opportunistic. Each organization has its own way of doing things. There's not really a whole lot of standardization. So I think the common denominator there is building as many relationships as possible, because you never know what's going to come up. And each organization has its own unique aspects to it. So the more you can put your name out there, the more you can meet people in the industry, you can break into it. And once you're in it, there really is, I would say, a whole lot of switching across leagues, across teams, going from the league office to a team, changing roles within an organization. I think it's just getting that first role that's kind of really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Quick question for you. I don't know if you have what level of insight you might have on this, but I want to contextualize a couple things. One thing is that we had 2 section mates. So out of our 93 that are working at you and Adler are working at the Minnesota Twins. So in Major League Baseball, I think those are the 2 in professional sports, or like in sports roles. I don't know.
I think that's right.
Exactly
there might be
sure,
others from other sections, but in our section for sure.
Yeah. Do you think that's like representative, like from like a percentage, or like is that representative of the entire of MBAs, or like a class of MBAs or an HBS, like 2 out of 100 kind of thing?
I wouldn't be shocked if it were smaller, to be honest. It might be 1 out of 100.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know there's some other classmates we have that are in professional sports, but different sports, I think. I'll have to double click into that and figure it out. What about at the Twins, or just in the different your I don't know, would you call them like sister organizations, like the other teams? You've probably gotten to know
I have a good relationship.
Are there a lot of MBAs in the front or on the business side of baseball teams?
A lot of GMs these days come from either law degrees or MBA degrees. There for sure is a class of roles in leadership positions that do often have MBAs entered them.
Yeah, and it probably speaks to some of like the qualities and skills that you mentioned, like versatility as an example, that might be kind of harnessed at programs like law schools or MBAs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think knowing a little bit about a lot can be really dangerous in a good way when you're working for a sports organization. Knowing just a little bit about how venue operations should work, knowing a little bit about concessions and food and beverage, knowing a little bit about finance and how a P&L or an income statement works. These things are pretty valuable. So I think the versatility piece, again, that's at a premium, I would say.
Gotcha. Okay. I want to be mindful of time. Appreciate this time you're giving us, but wrapping up here a little bit, I have 2 questions that I still want to ask you. We just kind of reflected on the past 10 years ish, and a lot about your MBA and the career path you've taken since then. But I'm curious what you think the ROI on your MBA has been.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about that from time to time. Um, I think for me, it's been huge, probably enormously positive. And I think about ROI as quantitative, but also intangible. You think about the quantitative ROI, like would I have been in a position to have this type of role had I not gone to business school? And I think in my own particular case, the answer is probably not. I probably wouldn't have been able to get into a role like I am right now had I not gone to business school and qualified myself for certain other jobs, built relationships with people who ultimately gave me opportunities that were pretty unique and special. So from that standpoint, I would say just the ROI in terms of career opportunities and the types of roles I've been able to get into has been really positive. And then on the intangible side, I would say, just being able to have a conversation like this. I mean, this is so special just to be able to have this network of people, of friends, of really close, contacts, acquaintance, whoever it may be, just to kind of tap into. So I think the intangible part of going to an MBA program and having that shared experience, to me, that goes straight into ROI. You can't quantify it, but it is real.
Yeah, totally. So there's the quantitative side, which I think is probably easier to formulate. It's the salaries and that sort of thing, financial largely, and then maybe time. And then there's the intangibles you mentioned, like the relationships and that sort of thing. So good to know. That's a good good way to think about ROI. Okay, thanks for sharing that. Last question here for you, Jason. What advice do you have for people? They might be early in their career, might be considering MBA, might just be interested in a career in sports. Like, what parting advice do you have for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people who are trying to go in to get their MBA, I think knowing exactly why you want your MBA is probably the most important thing. Maybe it's because you want to get the degree and you think that degree is going to be your golden ticket to get a certain job. Maybe it's because you want to, you want some time to do some reflection and self-discovery and figure out your career path. Maybe you just need a break. Maybe you want to pick up hard skills, but knowing exactly what it is you're trying to get out of it will let you then work backwards and figure out what steps you need to take to really make the experience worthwhile. So I think a lot of people just kind of go into it and say, well, that's just the next step. I've done this job for a couple of years. The next obvious step is to get an MBA. But if you unpack that a little bit and really think about the why, as you put it up front, I think that's the most important thing. And then I think just in general, sometimes life, whether you're a student, whether you're working, it can be pretty overwhelming. You have a lot of things thrown at you at once. You got a lot of projects going on. You got a lot of relationships to maintain. I think that getting stuck in the micro of, oh man, I got these 5 things going on, can be a dangerous cycle sometimes. So I think, taking a step back, really focusing on things that are really important, thinking long and hard about your career, where do I want to be in 10 or 15, 20 years, and focusing on those kind of those big rocks. I think that's the most important thing. Building and maintaining the most important relationships. For me, it's all a prioritization game. So how do you prioritize your time? And at the end of the day, are all the things that are being thrown at you, are they all equal priority? Probably not. So, I need to remind myself of that all the time. I fall into that trap quite often, but I think that's just a valuable piece of advice, whether you're a current MBA student, whether you're, a working professional or trying to get into an MBA program. That's kind of one of my big things.
Thank you, Jason. This has been such a value-packed conversation and just a joy to catch up. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Mike. It's been awesome sharing this time with you.